Directly to the point. Exactly how you.
That's like,
I just got back from Albert.
the minute that.
Oh. Fun, probably not.
Last motion. Get this
What
done.
a neat town.
That's what I've heard. I've never been there, but I've heard it's a great place. And it's like one of the top retirement communities in the country. One of the top 10 places where you
Thank you. There's the red line, the difference between the email and.
It's relatively.
Edits that
So-
the chairman provided earlier tonight.
Albuquerque itself is a neat town. I missed it, but this coming weekend is when they do the hot air balloon thing.
Oh.
Would have been nice to see. How are you, Kate?
Good, how are you? I always enjoy following you on Twitter. You go to like such they're great events, and you've always got a big smile on your face. It's just
Gotta love life.
yeah, I love life, absolutely. Either that oh, that'd be really awesome. Yeah, I know, right? Can you do that?
I would just work.
I know, right?
Letters
No.
and checks off in the everybody. I still got last night. I was looking at September, trying to get to my head. So
I know what you're gonna
No, I'm gonna have it's fine.
I'm
actually just happy that there's.
I don't like going to breakfast,
We're so.
even though I like leadership Fairfax. It's great events. I don't like getting up.
So we just.
Yeah.
Well, that's all right.
That might be 250.
But I still, my favorite is the,
Coming in.
Senator, you're right over there.
Do appointment.
yeah. Yeah, she'll get up. Yeah, that's part of the routine, right?
Yeah, imagine.
I think I might be missing it next week. It is the 14th, it's new to.
So Scott and I talked about that a while.
in the process of running it up.
Statewide, already in most.
My partner represents a nonprofit. He's probably run charger.
It's kind of confusing.
So you set it up as a
You have a
original
letter that
company.
says like you're great.
Yeah, you do a 501(3), 501(c)(3).
It's a real brief letter.
So you set it up as a company, but which flavor?
So just want to try to earn media dollars. Fine doing it. Everybody knows we did it.
Well, my partner does represent a lot of political advocacy groups. Nonprofits. He's done all that stuff about what kind of organization and how to do the papers and what can you do to maintain your status. And
Right.
Yeah, it's countywide mail. For his university.
that's really Jim you got to watch out for.
Yeah, like we were doing fairly
Doing something
small
you're not supposed to do.
15 challenges. And they were still at 55 grand. That was like a small. Yeah. Arthur.
You know, there are benefits to setting it up in DC versus Virginia.
Although it's my favorite.
Virginia is generally easier for everything.
He was fearlessly walking with his.
Oh, really? No, I'm not, I'm happy. I'm sorry.
Swipe your card.
Yeah.
Pulling card to tell them like, it's a good time. 3 minutes on the phone.
That sounds like a vegetarian pasta. Well, that was.
Yeah, no, he does. I mean, that's his bread and butter. No problem.
Yeah, it's feast your family. Yeah.
They must have messed it up. Did that
You get different people making the orders. Yeah. It's just fine.
Always show up.
Yeah, it's just fine.
Have an extra cookie.
As long as you're for profit, you turn it into a not for profit, okay?
Here's the bill.
All right.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm going Sunday. See, play.
Nice.
It was like a huge smile. Yeah, basically. She was like right.
Yeah, I guess. Tuesday. Oh, forget.
It's like.
You want that much? Good. When they want top of the night. That's all I got to see. I was flying home that day.
I was sure he did not look good. In the, I think it was 7th. They had a man on, and Rendon came up. And I said, "All right, this is it." They like had a weak pop up or something. That's it, So when they pulled it together, it was pretty amazing.
Well, I'm a Mets fan, I think, than that. But,
Oh, that's right.
Mets aren't in it. Mets just got rid of that
There's a bunch of vacancies.
Somebody, can they see your original meeting?
I did see that. I was reading the New York Post at CSTD, where I go for lunch once a week, because I like to read the Post because it's hilarious. And yeah, that's right. I did read that. They were thinking about Girardi and Buck Showalter, because he's been in New York before. Then they were talking about some other guy I didn't know.
Madden? Not Madden.
No, not Madden. He was something with a C. Stelly or something. And they said that he was, far cheaper. And I guess they thought the owners might go for that. He might have been in the organization, hadn't been a manager in the majors before, but he In New York, I mean, that's a tough place to start.
That's got some big talent out here.
Yeah, they do. They ought to contend.
This kid, Peter, broke the record for most home runs for a rookie.
Really?
53. The beast.
I'm a Yankees fan.
Well, he broke Aaron Judge's.
Yeah. Boy, when the Nats came with the Yankees played the Nats last year, it was conflicting. It was funny because in 05, 06, the first time they came, I rooted for the Yankees. And then they came around, I think 10 or 11. It was one of the years where the Yankees were bad and the Nats were good, and so I sort of rooted for the Nats. And then last year, it just felt weird.
But I gotta imagine the only transition for you was not so much Yankees fans, but American League fans.
You know what? I found out I like the National League better. I really do.
Like the game better? The strategy with the pitcher.
Yep. And the whole thing is just, the old American League 3-run homer and out strategy. Just, I like the money, the stealing. I love the way the Nats play. The speed, bunts, it's all the little stuff. It really makes the game fun.
So you have to worry about, do I use the pitcher here, do I get a pitcher over there? What do I do?
Yep.
Pitcher's doing well, but do I pull him?
And I always liked the DH in the American League thing. Just because that's what I knew, and I thought it was silly to have the picture of that. But once I started to watch the National League, I just much prefer the game.
Find your transport system.
I was posted on the
The
website.
silver line doesn't affect your
But I'm a big fan of it. It was easy for me to support. I was running in my district to be very pro-development, pro-transportation, raise money that way, and not have any of the negative issues, because I'm talking about developing Tyson's and Wrestling, which isn't my district, so I wouldn't get the backlash. I think it's hard for Republicans who run in areas of growth, and then they try to be anti-development because of low taxes, and then the developers are like, screw you, when I for you, then get ready to price. I just decided on day one, I said, I'm pro-development, and I'm not gonna try to hide it. It's like, you're either pro or you're against, right? You just can't. And that's how I was raising money. I call it a bill, and I never apologized for it. So it's who I am. I'm not hiding a thing.
Well, I was chairman of Bell's Chamber.
I know. I'll tell you, this concrete.
I know.
And they're not the little ones.
Yeah, that was hard and good.
I can see.
What I'm hearing is. You're delayed.
Yeah, they tell me.
That's off the record, but. Yeah.
Oh, not. And if you know that.
Yeah. So we kind of.
But you still like that.
Yeah. Yeah.
I know with my nephews that are
It's still
I was
hurting.
the only child.
It's still hurting. Now, the question is why. So I'm actually, maybe I'll use the sticker and put it on my phone. That happened. He gave me one and I lost it. So then he gave me one. Can't lose it now. Sorry, I can't lose it now. I put it on my phone.
I'm like, you lose your phone.
That's why, they have like, so for like, not these keys, but for my the car I usually drive, I have a like key chain thing. Track. It's called the tile. It's tile. Very easy. The one I got is called key smart, so it actually turns all of your keys, puts them on, basically it's just like it looks like a button. But it basically puts your keys onto that apparatus. So you go like 5
I don't know what happens in
Your
January.
car key
Doesn't meet
that's called key smart. I love it when it comes with the tile on them. So it tracks like you can.
but I don't know if I really have any as a non-supervisor.
When's the story good?
We were swearing in December,
Never
although they take office January 1.
No, this is honestly
But
the only way
the board doesn't meet until January 24th. And that's
I have my building.
the new Fairfax delegation. So I don't know, Sharon and I can come here. Quite frankly, I'm not sure I would, but I guess if somebody said, could I really vote? What would be the?
So we said, we go back.
Yeah, you know, it's,
So we have a ice chair running the show.
Sharon, Kathy, Hudgens and I are all leaving, so Faust will stay and McKay will stay, but y'all 3 new people. Yeah. ERE, both of them reps, so we know. I mean, there's a brain
He's
drain.
scared because you don't actually see the seat. This guy.
We're all the transportation for. Man.
I know, right? Nobody's-
What's going on?
No, we're not screwed. We're on the right side.
We're
We're out
fine.
of here.
We're fine. They get what they deserve.
I got a job, man.
We're fine. They get what they deserve.
That's right.
That's what I told Brian.
Oh, yeah. That's gonna be a 60-40 race. And the guy who beat me in the primary is losing by more than 10 votes. Yeah, right. I'm trying to be helpful. Well, I think we'll hold on to a couple and loud. And because the Democrats are running a really terrible race. Oh, really? Phyllis is not terrible. But she's running terrible. John Bell has been money. So I think some of our supervisors can do at least 2 or 3 on things.
Hugo. I would never.
That might be okay.
Pat should be okay. Problem.
I was worried about it.
Well, the problem we've got is Hugo gets killed because that's his district. And you can't control turnout.
They're gonna dump money on it.
That's the thing. I mean, I would never bet against him because he's a hard campaigner, but I mean, he's got everybody in the country targeted. They're gonna dump. They're gonna pound him on guns.
I like what he tried to do late, but it's like
You can't come in half-assed at the last minute. What they're gonna do is they're gonna hold up that special session and go, "This is your guy."
Agreed.
He can't run from that.
Agreed. Almost been preaching that for a while.
And it's gonna be tough.
Not even with the ass.
They don't even bother.
Not even the ass.
Really?
No, when I ran for state.
Oh,
They said
yeah.
that. They said because I proposed gun legislation, and it wasn't just my survey, it was giving me legislation. Even though it's literally saying you have to put bullets on your own property.
I don't think it's stupid. That endorsement's not worth the price. Because you
Well,
have.
I wouldn't have accepted these organized. Because you know what I mean? No worries. Put out. Anyway, well, party. A few more of these left. Think about it.
No, we want to get out of here.
You know what's up?
There's a game on tonight. Like,
That's
I
why I
don't want to
said-
be here until 11 o'clock.
Exactly. I gotta get the ass game. What's up?
How are you, Ron?
Almost live. How you doing?
Well, but you loudly said the chance.
Oh,
yes.
Fairfax is probably
Yeah. Agreed.
whether it's next year or 4 years.
Gotta be a first.
Yeah, but no, it's got to be a total, and then
That's really good.
party has to be remade.
I'm shifting like 30%. So it's definitely not all that.
And
You guys always
together.
You guys always.
I was thinking about that the other day.
No, that's not.
That silver diner is good.
That's convenient for me.
We'll see how this year.
Right up the road.
I was predicting that we were basically going to
This,
our questions.
The good thing is, if you're Republican and you win this year, you're golden for the rest of your
Fun
life.
time, thing in November.
No one's gonna touch
As long as Trump doesn't win re-election.
It is kind of fun though. Let's go back to
you. Well, he could. He absolutely was.
Then we
Like I
can-
said, I said
Then
next
we'll
year.
really
we're
be
in five.
then we'll really be in the darkness.
No, absolutely. I would not count him out.
At least they put me next to Evan again.
Elizabeth Warren. I mean,
Oh yeah.
I see my Democrat friends. I'm like, is that the best you can do? Really? I mean, we're handing this to you. Why would you do that?
Put up someone, anybody.
I mean, anybody.
Even the
but.
crazy mayor. Like, put the crazy mayor up. That's fine. You know, whatever.
Oh.
That will say anyway, it makes sense.
I miss
This stuff you create. And plus, you learn because he can't speak English.
reinforces every bad image.
Yeah, Sanders is going to be might die.
He's good.
Might die.
And all his votes are gonna go. I didn't think she had a shot. But Harris is just falling. No one else can stand up 2 feet.
Harris is bowling.
Just evaporated. Moving up, she's the best.
What? Why? Maybe this guy can explain. Can you run for
Business is on, I guess.
Democrat, you can stomach, right?
Thank you for your help, by the way.
Glad we were able to get it done.
Appreciate it.
How are you doing? The smile gets bigger every time I speak.
I tell you though, it has not slowed down yet. Like every night this week, I'm like, what the hell?
Yeah.
I need coaches.
Yeah. She wanted to be there.
Got so much stuff.
Hey,
how are you? Good.
setting up a party for next year.
Are you? Where are you going?
South Africa.
You went to South Africa?
Yeah, some friends, so.
But we'll give you some
Okay. And that's one of my friends. It's his 50th birthday, so he's getting some. He's doing all well, man.
No,
We're waiting on the It should be fun.
It's stuff that I should look into. Start looking now about getting here. You have to face it in.
You okay?
Oh, that's really good to know.
And your Filipino
Thank you. That's very good. I would have waited until like 6 weeks.
That's why you have you can tell the results.
So you were in Albuquerque? Yeah, it is.
I'm sorry. I just
Really?
stay a few more days.
Hello, how are you?
I'm good.
Good.
I'm trying to make it easy.
Well, that's right.
I know. I know.
Okay, thank you for knowing me. Okay. Okay, so what do you want?
Yeah, but I'm free to say.
That has a potential.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to our October meeting. Your chair is about a foot shorter than usual. Matt Letourneau sends his regrets. He's not able to be with us tonight. He's in the district for a League of Women Voters Forum. So let's begin with the Pledge of Allegiance. Mr. Smedberg, would you lead us?
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
All right. Welcome. No, yeah, we do have quorum. Thank you very much. We actually have a pretty packed agenda tonight, so we will shortly get to it. A number of action items, including NVTC's notice of direct contributions to the jurisdiction, 2 separate letters commenting on the Long Bridge draft environmental impact statement and on the bus transformation study. And we do expect some conversation in particular on the latter. Our 2019 report on the performance and condition of WMATA. 2 actions with regard to the commuter choice program, our 2019 annual report to the Commonwealth Transportation Board, and our 395-95 program of projects to be referred to the CTB. 2 actions with regard to VRE, referring the operating and capital budget to the jurisdictions, and submitting 2 VRE projects for consideration by the authority for the 6-year program update. And in addition to our monthly reports from our WMATA board members, WMATA committee chair, and the VRA CEO, we will hear a presentation from Director Mitchell of DRPT regarding the Commonwealth's relationship to VRA and about rail. and provide highlights of our most recent annual transit performance reports. So to move into our first action item, which is approval of the minutes. Is there, so moved as Mr. Stiles, Mr. Aguirre?
Second.
Great, seconded by Mr. Stiles. Did you make the motion?
I did.
Great, thank you. Senator Black was the second. Is there any discussion of the motions? Okay, all those in favor of approval, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Any abstentions? Can we see hands for our secretary? Okay. All right, next we'll move on to the consent agenda, which has two items on it, the authorization of notice of direct contributions to the jurisdiction and the authorization of the chairman to send a letter endorsing action alternative A, that is the preferred alternative, with regard to the Long Bridge draft environmental impact statement. So we have a motion for approval of the consent agenda.
So moved.
Okay, thank you very much. Moved by Mr. Meyer, seconded by Ms. Bennett Parker.
I have
Please.
one question. Could you explain to me the impact of the letter regarding the draft environmental impact statement? What is it specifically that we're agreeing to and what's the legal effect of it?
That's an excellent question. I'm actually going to turn to both Kate as our staff and then Director Mitchell, if you'd like to comment anything about the EIS, which I know you briefed us on last month.
So this is our opportunity to support the alternative that's identified, the preferred alternative that's identified within the EIS. And that this is something that we've done historically when there is an option for the commission to prefer. A lot of this is making statement in support of Long Bridge and what is currently being proposed. And I'd love to be able to refer over to Director Mitchell as to the value of having a letter coming from the commission on this.
Yeah, I mean, it really is. The DEIS is what outlines the preferred alternative there. And I think really the importance of the letter is to affirm the jurisdictions or the recommendations that are coming out of the draft DEIS regarding that alignment.
So
Resolve your question?
could I ask a follow-up question? If there's an alternative A, is there a B or C, and what is alternative A?
So and without having it in front of me, that essentially the recommendation is to build a new 2-track bridge just upstream from the existing 2-track bridge. The new 2-track bridge would be dedicated to commuter and passenger rail service, while the existing 2-track bridge would be retained for freight service. However, both would be designed to be interoperable if needed. The alternative B was to build the new 2-track bridge plus rehabilitate the existing 2-track bridge for CSX. And it was determined that was not necessary, that really it was just the alternative A, which only involved the construction of a new bridge, met the purpose and need of the study. There were a number of alignments that were examined. This was really, there are very, very few feasible alternatives because it really is like threading a needle through that part of the corridor. So.
And so was there an alternative C, or there were really just the two alternatives?
No, I believe it was
I'm
just
just
A.
trying to figure out what it is.
No action.
At one point, there were like 6 or 8 that gradually were weeded through and gradually were ruled out for various reasons, mostly because of technical feasibility or impacts. So.
If it's helpful, Mr. Snyder, having read it and in my capacity as chair of the VRE, I would not characterize it as a couple of good options and this is the best. This is probably the only real option to meaningfully advance the goals of this project is how I'd characterize it.
And this doesn't commit us to any particular funding of it, is that right? This is purely an EIS.
That's correct. Yeah, that will be a subject for major consideration.
Right.
And we wanted to talk just a little bit about the bicycle ped bridge, because I think that's separate and how that's, we would still want that.
Right now, it's not a part of the locally preferred alternative because it has been DDOT, DCDOT, who's leading this in coordination with VRE and with DRPT, is working with the Park Service to potentially have that as mitigation for the impacts on the National Park Service land. And as also a method to improve mobility, but really it's being offered more as a mitigation, be worked through as a mitigation measure, as opposed to a core part of the preferred alternative.
Okay, thank you. I know it's kind of being in there. I just want to keep hearing how we're going to do it.
Thank you.
I feel the same way, Ms. Garvey. I think that'll be an area where the commission can continue to advocate. Any further questions on that or our other consent agenda item? Seeing none, all those in favor? Aye. Any opposed? All right, those two items pass. Thank you. We do have a slight change from our usual agenda, and actually I think possibly the agenda that was circulated last week, which is that we are going to begin with a presentation from rail and public transportation. Jennifer Mitchell generally stays with us late into the evening. However, I believe she has to be in Williamsburg at 9 a.m. tomorrow. So as a courtesy and because it's keeps us all on our toes when we occasionally mix it up with Lamana and other content, right? We are going to invite her to give a presentation about the Commonwealth's commitment to passenger rail and provide a couple of highlights.
I wish. No, and thank you. I have to get to Williamsburg for the Virginia Railroad Association conference, which I'm missing today, but I need to be at early tomorrow morning. So I appreciate you entertaining this request to move me up a little bit earlier in the agenda. I will also apologize that the presentation that I'm going to be flipping through is at your seats. And I will apologize in advance to those of you that have already seen this at the VRE Ops Board meeting, but and some of you may hear it again at NVTA, but I wanted to have the opportunity to provide some information because we have a number of new members, but also it was a really good opportunity for us to lay out at a big picture the Commonwealth's relationship with VRE because we do view VRE as a very important partner of ours, and especially moving forward with a number of projects in the future, which I'll go through as well. But just flipping through on page 1, we actually fund VRE through, VRE is a little bit of a hybrid in the state because it is eligible for both our transit funds and also eligible for our statewide rail funds as well. So we fund VRE through a number of different mechanisms. On our rail programs, they can receive funds through a rail enhancement fund, our intercity passenger rail operating capital fund. On our transit side, we fund them through capital funds, also operating funds. VRE is receiving smart scale funding for capital projects, also funding from the I-66 outside the Beltway, toll concessionaire payments, and we have some discretionary statewide federal funds that we also do provide to VRE as well. And I'll talk a little bit more about this. On page 3, this map really shows why we are so invested in VRE. VRE really does move the equivalent, as I'm sure many of you have heard already here from Doug, the equivalent of one lane off of traffic off of 95 and 395 and I-66. Because these are statewide corridors of significance. And so for that reason, we really are very invested in keeping VRE strong and healthy and continuing to grow. On page 4, just a couple of examples of the statewide support. As I mentioned before, VRE is receiving $92 million for projects in the Fredericksburg corridor. This includes also yard expansion, but also some station improvements. They are receiving $128 million for the Broad Run station maintenance facility storage expansion. And in addition to that, some additional improvements on the Manassas line that will help improve capacity on the Manassas line. This station, the storage facility is incredibly important to us because right now it's really impossible for VRE to be able to expand service on the Manassas line until this is done. And so recognizing that the Manassas line has such a significant impact to I-66, this was a very important project for us to see move forward. On page 5, we also provide 83% of the track access fees that VRE pays to CSX, Amtrak, and Norfolk Southern. This is made up of some of it from our statewide transit capital funds. We also provide $9.3 million from our flexible STP funds, which again are discretionary federal monies that we have a lot of flexibility to use, but we have dedicated those to VRE. These track access payments come out of VRE's operating budget. So essentially they are providing additional support to VRE's operating budget and also helping to lessen the subsidy requirement on the jurisdictions as a result. And that's also shown on page 6. The state funds about 30% of VRE's operating budget. About 50% of it comes from fare revenues. 15% is from the local subsidy payments, and then there's another 6% from federal funding as well. On the capital side, we went back and we looked at all of the capital projects that are currently in VRE's capital plan, and from inception to date, the amount of state funding that has gone or will be going towards those projects in the future. And in a nutshell, it's about 50% of VRE's capital program right now is being funded through a variety of state funding sources, including a number of the ones that I mentioned before. So. And that's an annual breakdown of that is shown on page 8, again, with just an overview of the state fundings that we're providing, along with some of the federal funds that VRE uses for capital, along with NVTA and the CROC revenues that were created in the General Assembly last year. I'm trying to go through these very quickly, so yeah, okay. On page 9, what I want to do now is talk about some of the DRPT projects that are in the pipeline right now that we are funding or either fully funded or are putting funds towards, which are also going to help benefit VRE. At the top of this list is obviously the Long Bridge, which we talked about a little bit a while ago. We've actually allocated $214 million in our 6-year plan that was just approved in June as what I would say would be our down payment towards the state's contribution towards Long Bridge. We are putting together a funding plan of other sources. Still a lot of moving parts on that before we will have all of that nailed down. As you can imagine, a big piece of that is actually going to be federal funding and federal support as well. The 4th track project of $185 million, this is actually part of the Atlantic Gateway program of projects, although I should say we're no longer calling it Atlantic Gateway because it's part of a much bigger program of projects. Again, with a majority of this coming from state funding and $45 million from a federal fast lane grant, this will essentially provide that 4th track approach up to the Long Bridge. So it's an incredibly important project. As I mentioned before, our goal here is to separate CSX's freight traffic from VRE service to help reduce conflicts. And on the next page, moving farther south, we've also funded $220 million for the Franconia to Occoquan 3rd track project. Again, that was originally proposed as part of the Atlantic Gateway program of projects. We have underway right now the Arkandale to Powells Creek 3rd track project. This was a project where we received federal money several years ago from one of the ARA programs or the high-speed rail programs from several years ago. Plus, we're matching that with $40 million in our intercity passenger rail funding. And the reason I lay all of this out is because I know you all have heard a lot about Long Bridge. You'll hear more about that in the coming months. But the important thing to note about Long Bridge is that it's not just the bridge itself that's important. In order to make the entire system work and to then get the capacity and the service that we want to get out of this, it's really important to make all of these other supporting investments. You don't get the value of the $2 billion investment in the bridge unless you build all this other stuff. You don't get the value of all this other stuff unless you also put it together with the bridge. And so this is something we've been working very closely with VRE on, working with our partners at CSX as well to lay out all of these investments. And then also to start working through the type of service that all of these improvements will then open up. And essentially what we'll get, we're not investing in infrastructure. I say we collectively are not investing in infrastructure for the sake of investing in infrastructure. We're investing in infrastructure to get more service. That's the whole goal of what we're doing here, is to get more train slots. So we're in the process of working through those issues with the host railroads right now. On page 11, just talking about the expansion of Long Bridge and the new bridge that will be created. It will allow for essentially VRE to be able to fulfill its 2040 strategic plan that was passed by the board. VRE would have the ability to use about over two thirds of the new capacity that would be provided by the new bridge. While there's no plans in Maryland right now to fund MARC run-through service, this would certainly open up the opportunity in the future, should there be a desire by Maryland to do that, to actually have some run-through trains from Maryland serving Crystal City out in Alexandria, which really could be very transformative for the entire region, should that occur, as well as allowing additional Amtrak trains too, which feeds into our DC to RVA, very much long-term program as well. So there's a few other unfunded VRE needs, and that we are working very closely with VRE on right now. The Crystal City Station, majority of funding has been lined up. There's still 15.8 in of that's unfunded right now. We're helping to fund the planning and engineering. I believe the VRE Ops Board has just approved a contract for that, so we're glad that's moving forward. All of these projects, because they're in the same physical vicinity, really need to be coordinated and funded at the same time. We can't go in and build fourth track and then go in and rip it up to build these other things. So a big part of this from a governance standpoint is really going to be coordination of, us, VRE, CSX, and all the other parties that are going to be involved in this. In addition to that, the L'Enfant station platforms will be New Island platforms. Again, because it's in this same exact corridor, just on the DC side of Long Bridge as well, is something that we will also continue to work with VRE to look at helping to fund that funding gap that's still there. So just looking ahead, as I mentioned before, we are still working through a bigger funding plan, not just for Long Bridge, but for this overall program of projects that I've outlined. We have secured the funding for the fourth track project, Franconia to Occoquan, which we're moving forward into final design and construction. And then also we funded PE, preliminary engineering for Long Bridge as well. All of those are already in our 6-year plan. We have submitted an application to NVTA for a proposed passenger rail bypass in the Franconia to Springfield area. And essentially what this would do is give us the ability to seamlessly move VRE trains from the easternmost tracks over to the westernmost tracks to be able to then serve Alexandria and Crystal City, and then line up to then be able to go onto the new Long Bridge. And then we're going to continue to work with VRE to help fund these unfunded portions of Crystal City project and also L'Enfant Plaza, because it's very important to us that those projects move forward at the same time as well. So I tried to go through this quickly, but please feel free to ask me if you have any questions.
Please, yeah, questions.
Actually, Jennifer and Doug may have the answer, may be better positioned to answer this, but in terms of existing capacity, is without the Long Bridge expansion, is there existing capacity that can be utilized by VRE? Could additional trains be added?
No, it's really, right now it's at 98% capacity in the peak period. So it's, and CSX is, essentially really not able to give us any more additional slots either for statewide passenger rail service or for VRE service until the bridge is really expanded.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Scott, I can add from the VRE perspective, that 98% congestion is already causing pretty significant service problems. So when we saw, for example, some of the delays related to positive train control or the heat advisory challenges that we've experienced this summer, the congestion at that crossing has certainly exacerbated all of them. So the current state is not optimal, let alone without room for growth. Please, Mr. Ryan.
So thank you, Madam Chairman. So my question is having to do with an update on federal funding for Long Bridge. So where are we? I know that we've sort of had I know that they've come through TPP, some updates to the TIP and other things. But where are we as far as the process in our advocacy for more federal funding?
We're working right now to identify the best source of funding for this project. For a project like this that has rail elements to it, transit elements to it. USDOT and their programs as a result are very siloed. And so it's very tough to find, and the programs that they have that are available for projects like this give out much smaller grants that, will be difficult to cobble together a meaningful federal share from a lot of little grants.
It's just bizarre because this is definitely a project of national significance. We talk about regionally significant projects, but this is the bottleneck for the whole East Coast. So you think that they'd be able to figure a way to step up to the plate, but at the same time, the current formulas you're saying are difficult to work with.
So we're also in conversations with Amtrak about funds that could come from Amtrak. There's a program at the Federal Transit Administration that a project like this would be eligible for. That is a very, very long timeline for getting through that process. But we are looking at those two programs and in conversations with the feds at both levels. But I think there is actually pretty broad agreement that this is a project that has national significance. And, there should be a federal role in helping to fund this project, so.
Excellent. I think I saw Mr. Vargas and then Ms. Garvey.
Just very, we may have talked about, you mentioned Amtrak, the other private sector, CSX and NS, are they stepping up as well too?
So it's really not, I would say NS doesn't, they run a couple trains over the bridge, but very few actually. They don't have steady customers that use it. We are working with CSX as well to identify what their funding share will be. I can say they will definitely have skin in the game on for the project.
So we just have working out the percentages, I guess.
So if everything went as well as it might, when might we see a bridge?
I mean, we're looking at this as a 10-year program of projects.
Okay,
I
only
mean,
10
we're-
years.
Yeah, I mean, it's the bridge, it's all these other projects as well. And in some ways, it may make sense to start some of those other projects first and then the bridge second. So we're working through the construction sequencing of all of those many elements. Because don't forget, we have to keep running the railroad through all of this at the same time. And so, but I would say, I would look at this as really, through 2030 for the whole program of
Yeah, I'm just
projects.
kind of 1 to 2 decades. Yeah, okay.
Thank you.
I mean, I'm not gonna hold my breath.
Don't hold it that long.
All right. Any other questions? Okay, thank you so much,
Thank
Dr.
you.
Mitchell. We appreciate the presentation. Okay, moving on then to our regularly scheduled programming, the WMATA update. So a few items today. I don't believe that the chair of the WMATA committee is with us, so I'm gonna maybe deliver a couple of remarks on her behalf and then turn to staff and open up, of course, to other members of not only our WMATA committee, but then certainly the members of the WMATA board who sit here to my left. So we have an action before us, which is first to authorize the executive director to send the 2019 report on the performance and condition of WMATA, i.e. our annual WMATA report as mandated by the General Assembly, to the governor and to the General Assembly, and to send an updated version with NTD data once we receive it. So this report is due to the General Assembly and governor by statute on November 1st of each year. It is our primary opportunity to articulate our priorities for controlling costs and improving operational efficiency at WMATA, as well as providing a one-stop shop for Metro Rail and Metro Bus performance data and how WMATA is using the dedicated funds. So just a gentle reminder to everyone, we actually had a very fulsome conversation about the content of this report at our last meeting. It has not changed. So I'm hopeful we don't need to get too deep in the weeds of the actual substance on which we had such a productive conversation last month. Nevertheless, we are here. The WMATA committee met on September 18th to review the final. And we are considering it for action. I will summarize a couple notes that we otherwise might have heard from Ms. Hudgens. As a reminder about what we heard last month, there are 5 new strategies and 3 carryover strategies for cost control, including maximizing use of 8-car trains, improving weekend rail service, developing parking pass products, optimizing parking facilities, and expanding and enhancing fare pass products, as well as rebuilding rail and bus ridership and improving operational efficiency, increasing non-fare revenue and optimizing revenue collection, control cost escalations, and enhancing workforce and contractor efficiencies. So you have before you a full draft of the report, which includes feedback and review from the WMATA committee. One note, there are a few specific data elements that are awaiting formal approval by the FTA. As soon as this data is released, staff are going to update the report and transmit it to the governor and General Assembly by November 1. So I think we had some conversation about this last month. We are a little bit asynchronous between the director of the General Assembly to report on November 1, allowing us enough time for review, and then when that data comes forward from the FTA. So we do expect that data will not change the content of our recommendations, but there will be one piece to be added after a review. I will complete talking now. I see Mr. Lemunyan has a question. We'll begin with you.
Well, maybe just 2 points, not a question. I noticed in the appendices for the package for tonight that some of the most recent Metro Rail ridership data looked encouraging, separate from the Alexandria situation over the summer. I'm just wondering if that's worth a mention in this report. I didn't notice it in there, in addition to the annual FY18 stuff, but I did see those blanks. So I think if there's a good news story there, we should probably think about telling it. That would be the good audience. The second point is what I'll just refer to as the 3% rule that the General Assembly imposed. I didn't see a lot of discussion about that in particular in the document. Certainly there's, cost control kinds of things. There was one mention in one of the tables where it just said the 3% rule or something like that, and the only statement in the other box was ongoing. And I think that's kind of the big elephant in the room from the standpoint of the General Assembly. And I think the question is going to be, are we on track to hit the 3% rule or are we not? And I think we want to be real clear about it.
It's an excellent piece of feedback. I'm going to turn to Kate for an initial reaction, but then if we have members of our WMATA committee want to chime in.
Absolutely. And I think there's there's been actually opportunities, and obviously Director Mitchell just left, the reporting of the 3% rule is something that's been done actually just recently to the Commonwealth Transportation Board. One of the things, it has to be met in order for us to be able for the Commonwealth not to withhold money. And so they did a positive report this year. We definitely can make some reference to that in the cover letter. I think might be a really good spot for that. And also with the ridership, indeed, we are seeing some rebounds on ridership. The snapshot in time from this is right before that, but we absolutely could add something like that to the cover letter of the report.
I could just add briefly, so we will have an extensive discussion of Metro ridership, most recent data next week, actually. So we'll be sure, as you always do, to follow that conversation closely for the updated data, but it does tell the story that has been intimated by what NVTC has reported, that it appears that the trough, we are past that and are moving ever so incrementally upward. And I will also just say for Mr. Lemunion's benefit, the 3% legislative requirement from the Commonwealth and from Maryland is not so much a rule as it is a mandate. So there's never a question as to whether WMATA is on track to meet it. It has to. The budget has to be constructed with that in mind. So it's never subject to will they or won't they, or will they choose to follow that path this year. It is.
Sometimes it's okay to state the obvious.
And I also would say incrementally moving past the trough could be the new back to good.
There we go.
All right. Any further discussion on the contents of the report? Okay, seeing none. I want to thank both Mr. Neuwitter and the staff, as well as our WMATA committee for working on that and turning what is in fact a mandate to actually a very actionable document, as well as one to give us some direction as we continue.
And Madam Chair, if I could, just recognizing the staff and the work that they did. This was a year that they did it on their own and used the model that we worked with the first year. And so it was good work on their part. Yeah.
Right, excellent. With
We have
all
two
of that,
actions.
I'm sorry, we did go ahead and make that motion, right?
No.
No, we need a motion
Madam
on the
Chair.
table to accept that.
Madam Chair, I authorize the Executive Director to send the 2019 report on the performance and condition of WMATA to the Governor and the General Assembly and send an updated version of the NTD data if needed.
Second.
Great, any further discussion? All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, that carries. Thank you very much. Perhaps an item for slightly more deliberation. This is a blue sheeted item with regard to the bus transformation project. I am going to try to introduce this issue a bit, as well as introduce our blue sheeted item, which are some recommendations to changes to that letter from our chair, based on recent conversations among the WMATA committee members. You may recall the bus transformation project released its final recommendations, released some preliminary recommendations earlier this year. At the time, this commission weighed in with a few concerns. Don't mean to understate it, weighed in with some significant concerns, particularly with regard to authority, opportunity, and accountability for our bus systems moving forward, how we could both work regionally without losing the things that are valued about our local bus systems. We sent a letter supporting 3 specific recommendations and recognizing concerns about, we sent a letter with some specific recommendations, which were to some extent included in the final bus transformation project report released in early September. But largely our concerns were addressed in that the final report is fairly silent on them, and mostly kind of kicks those decisions to a task force to be set up. The proposed composition of the task force in turn has raised some significant concerns for our jurisdictional representation, staff and members, as well as for our WMATA committee. I am cognizant that I am now speaking on behalf of a committee that I am not a member of. So would one of our WMATA committee representatives, like reading Ms. Hutchinson's points here, would one of our WMATA committee members like to take a stab at characterizing our concerns a bit further than I already have? Once we've done that, we'll move into the actual letter for our approval.
I think you pretty much hit it.
Yeah?
It's like you're there.
I didn't even have to be there.
Yeah.
All right, okay, so seeing that, we had an item considered for our recommendation. Matt Letourneau has moved a few red line changes that is on your blue sheeted item. And we did have some conversation in executive committee about a couple of further points that we'd like to amend the letter to read. I would summarize by them as saying we are most concerned that the task force composition as recommended excludes actual transit operators. We see that as pretty problematic for a couple of reasons. The first of which is that the task force would then be missing some very important expertise and representation, particularly as our WMATA committee members have talked about. A lot of the innovation in bus service is already happening among the Northern Virginia operators. To exclude that would be to exclude a lot of opportunity and good thinking from the task force. Further, any decision the task force will have fiscal implications, potentially major ones, and we can't support recommending a task force that wouldn't include our operators in making those decisions that would have fiscal impacts on our system. So Mr. Letourneau's red lines are designed to capture some of that. We talked a little bit about those other issues, fiscal impact, missed opportunity for innovation within exec, and staff has got those for further follow-up. Let me now open the floor for discussion about this letter for others to raise any concerns they may have. And if you'd like to propose further edits than the ones that have been advanced by Mr. Letourneau or that I've summarized already, by all means, this is our opportunity. You know what, actually procedurally, let me begin with questions and then I'm gonna ask for a motion so that we can make amendments to that language. So questions on the bus transformation project or our response to it. See Ms. Garvey first?
Yeah, just a question on the task force. I'd like to know what folks think. Is the idea of a task force itself maybe not such a good idea, or is the task force fine just how it's constituted? So if they improve who's on it, we're gonna be okay with it. It feels like we're just kind of creating a whole new group when we've got a lot of groups already. So I don't know what folks who've looked at this longer think. But
Is there a reaction from Kate or WMATA committee or board members?
Well, I think there's a lot of wisdom in what Ms. Garvey says. There's not yet the clear case as to what this implementation task force is going to do that existing structures or organizations can't do. Yet I think where we landed, at least in committee, saying, well, but if there is value to that, even though we can't see it, if there is value to it, it certainly doesn't have value if it doesn't have the people who actually do this.
yeah, okay. Do we want to say something specific about that in the, I don't know if we're going to add that language. Yeah, Paul. Sorry.
Libby, I think this next phase is going to be really important. It's going to develop what I think people think this project should be.
Mhm.
So having the right expertise, Christian made that point earlier, and other, we need to have the right people on here. And likely a task force is probably a good idea, but again, getting the right people on this
Totally
is going to
agree.
be key.
Okay, that's
So I think we need to really drive that
Yep.
point.
absolutely. No, I get that.
Other questions about the project, the study, the task force going forward, our letter? Okay, so could I have a motion on the table? We do have Mr. Letourneau's amendments before us, so if somebody would like to move that version, or you're welcome to move the original that was in our packet. Either a good starting place for discussion.
Madam Chairman, I'll move the letter on blue item number 4A.
Because it's blue, that includes Mr. Letourneau's, or Chair Letourneau's comments. Thank you. That was seconded by Mr. Meyer. Great, thank you. Mr. Aguirre, did you have comments or further amendments?
I don't know if you guys already talked about this before, but second page, second paragraph, it says, and those that operate, I believe it should be in those that operate.
Good Eagle Eye. Thank you. I think we can consider that a friendly amendment to the manual.
We are approving this in concept, not, this is gonna be subject to a final
Good.
draft.
Yes. Which our chair will approve, however, will not come back to the full commission.
But the
Given that
board
it's
is
our chair's
welcome-
amendments we're approving, I think we address that. Okay, any further discussion, questions, amendments? All right, glad to be on the same page and thank you to the work of our committee as well as our chairman for giving us a way forward to make those points of remaining concern. All right, all in favor of the letter in concept, subject to further, I guess, approval or final approval by our chairman, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Okay, that carries unanimously. Thank you. Okay, we move then to a report from our WMATA board members. Mr. Dorsey.
Mr. Smedberg.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Okay, so the few items here, the WMATA board approved several action items in September. First, we'd like to highlight that the board approved the FY 2020 capital funding agreement, which sets forth terms and the relationship between WMATA and its contributing jurisdictions. Negotiations are currently underway between WMATA and jurisdictional staff on an updated 6-year agreement, and really want to call out the work of Andrew and the other jurisdictional staff in this regard and helping us to get to this point and their continued work on the 6-year agreement. The WMATA board approved a modification of the regional bus subsidy allocation to prepare for Loudoun's entry as a full funding partner. As we are all aware, Loudoun County has not asked for Metro bus service. The action excluded Loudoun County from the population density factor of the regional Metro bus subsidy allocation formula. Loudoun, however, will pay for regional Metro bus service based on its average weekday ridership, which is a fraction of a percentage. So this was, a lot of work went into this, both by staff, and I have to call out Christian here as chair of the finance committee for really doing the heavy lift on the board side of things to get this through and to do all the outreach. But a good outcome. We were joking with Matt and Penny at the board meeting on Thursday after the vote was approved. They were standing around and went up to him and we go, "Hurry up, get out of here quick before people change their mind." So anyway, a big advancement there. The WMATA board approved a budget amendment and collective bargaining agreement for the Fraternal Order of Police, and this is the last of the CBAs that have been outstanding. So we're done with those items for the foreseeable future. And lastly, the WMATA board approved revisions to its code of ethics to improve transparency and accountability and fairness to all parties. These reforms refer to ethics investigations. We're going to refer ethics investigations to the OIG, require a written investigation summary report that will be made public, and require the board to make a written determination regarding ethics violations that will be made public. So those are pretty significant changes. You've all obviously seen the press coverage of all this over the past several months. We really hope that we have now turned a page and we can start focusing on and being the issues that are going to matter and advance WMATA into the future, and working with the general manager in a much more strategic way. So really significant changes there on that front. And last, the Safety and Operations Committee received an update on the Silver Line Phase 2. In early August, MWA stated that the Silver Line Phase 2 was expected to be open to the public on July 16th, 2020. Just for some clarification, that is not MWA's decision to make. It is the Metro Board's decision to make. And there's a lot of discussion that will be taking place between now and a date in the future as to when the Silver Line opens up. And Chairman Bulova, want to thank you, Fairfax County, for your letter. I think the commission did see it. Did the commission see it? Maybe not. There was a letter, Jeff and Sharon. Thank you, John.
Strongly worded.
Yeah, strongly worded letter. It was well done. It was helpful. This is a real serious issue, and we're obviously as a board, we're following it very closely, as is the general manager and his team. And and we are communicating with the MWA, the Airports Authority, to address all these issues. But we'll be hearing more updates in the near future. So
Chairman, our letter was approved by our full board and presented to Mr. Potter. Actually, I personally delivered it. They're as concerned as WMATA and Fairfax County and the jurisdictions regarding these deficiencies. And so I was told that our letter, and maybe others like it, helped to bolster MWA's position with making sure that, we're holding the contractor's feet to the fire and making sure that we get what we've asked for. So anyway, any other jurisdiction that would
as far as making our county buy into Metro, that sort of work on your part to save us a good chunk of money that obviously we aren't using the bus systems as much. I mean, I think it's a tiny fraction. So it really did a lot to, I think, reinforce the goodwill of the deal that we made in the first place. I will say that I think I've heard on the issue of the Silver Line. I think it's good as a starting point to be exactly where you are. But ultimately, I'm not sure you're gonna be able to rebuild every concrete tie or rebuild any of those stations with the concrete. And so we're gonna have to come to a compromise at some point. What I'm afraid of, and I think some others are probably afraid to vocalize, is that at some point you're gonna have to make a deal. And I'm not sure. I think we're really far away from that point. And so that's what I would just throw in as feedback. I think where you are right now makes total sense. We want to be in the best negotiating position with the contractor, and you want to be strong as a WMATA board. But I don't see how you rip up every concrete tie, and I don't see how you rip up any of those stations where the bad concrete is and start fresh. And so ultimately, it's going to be a settlement and some sort of remediation. And so we have to get to that point. I think you guys are starting a strong negotiating position, but I don't want that to be taken as no deal, period. I think what I'd like to see more of, maybe this is happening behind the scenes and you can't share it with us. I think that's great. That's fine. We have to be making a deal in this circumstance to make sure that, yes, they did wrong. It needs to be remediated. But from an actual, like, how do you actually fix it physically? It seems like it's a harder puzzle than just be tough. And maybe I'm wrong, but that's the perception I've got.
Mr. Garcia.
I will say
Sure.
that
Yeah.
some things can be ripped up and replaced, and in which case they should be. But let me just say without saying anything, we want to see this thing open. We don't want to see this protracted indefinitely. So I think we hear you.
Okay, good. Just making sure.
And negotiations are underway, looking for ways to be able to correct the deficiencies. For instance, the coating that was initially applied to the concrete panels turned out in a certain percentage of the panels not to be effective. That doesn't necessarily mean that all of those panels have to be ripped out, but that it could be a matter of how the coating was applied, and, going back, to try to do things differently or correctly. So anyway, there's a lot of work being done to try to get to, the safe delivery, or the delivery of a safe, project. Safety and making sure that we're not going to create long-term maintenance problems down the road for WMATA and for our jurisdiction.
Certainly it's not a way to pay for it.
Right.
Maybe that's one of the things.
Right.
Maybe they have to create a separate capital fund that pays. I don't know, but thank you. That's helpful.
Yeah, Ron, that is something Sharon just said is key. Long-term maintenance issues, but also long-term financial issues. And there was a public, you might want to actually go to the website and hold on the presentation from the team that is looking at this, Ron Leader, or Joe Leader, who is leading the effort in the review of the center line. There are essentially 12, 13 items. 4 have been addressed. I think it's 4. There's another sort of 4 in process. But then there are 3 or 4 that are really significant, like really significant issues that are going to take some work. And, they're just not, again, we're not going to accept something that not only is going to create a maintenance and fiscal burden, but also a couple of these are safety related. We're not going to run trains on something that, could potentially cause a safety hazard.
Totally.
So,
Well,
but
I appreciate.
yeah, but as Christian said, we clearly know we want this thing open.
We
So-
appreciate your work on it. Well, I'll say I represent all of the Ashburn area, all the stations in Loudon. And certainly we want it open, but when we hear MWA saying that we're still on track to open it in July of next year, which I know is not you all saying.
That statement was not accurate.
Well, but
Yeah.
but there needs to be some correction happening too, because I tend to think that you all, I think that you all are doing the right thing and making sure these all issues are all worked out. Like I'm saying, obviously you have to have compromise at some point, but we also need to set expectations reasonably when it's still reported in the papers that it's July.
So I'm gonna let a few other voices into this conversation.
Yeah, I'm
I think.
sorry.
Yeah, no, I appreciate it, but we've got Senator Black, Ms. Garvey, and Mr. Cook.
I understand what's being said. I would tell you, as a former Marine engineer, I used to sit down and calculate and formulate concrete. And this is not nuclear physics. And the fact that we got a contractor who cannot make concrete is very distressing. I mean, that is a serious elemental problem. And while I don't disagree with what Supervisor Meyer said, but it's really distressing. And I have seen projects where you go over, I know there's a bridge somewhere as you're going into DC where the thing is just crumbling, pieces are falling off of it. And it's because somebody is cutting corners on the concrete. the wetter and the soupier you make the mix, the weaker it is and the cheaper it is to put it in. And so you got a contractor who appears to be cutting corners and doing it at the expense of the taxpayers and at the expense of the future of this project. So we ought to take a real close look at that contractor. And in the future, if he is unable to manufacture basic concrete, we better take a look at whether somebody else ought to be doing our work for us.
Thank you very much, Senator. But as we move on, I'm going to assume that's part of the scope of conversation between MWA and Metro right now.
Absolutely.
Thank you. But thank you for raising that perspective. Ms. Garvey?
Yeah, and I'll just be I mean, I think we're all really on the same page, but, and I understand where Mr. Meyer is coming from, and sure, we want to get it built, but because there's cameras and people listening, just make it really clear, we are not going to negotiate so that somebody that did shoddy work gets away with it. We're just not. I think that's where we are, and I think I just kind of wanted to say that really clearly, and I trust you guys to be doing that, but we just can't allow somebody to get away with that.
Mr. Cook?
Yeah, sort of similar to what Libby said. I don't want to wordsmith, but it's one thing to compromise on a legal dispute. I mean, I do that every day, but we cannot compromise on safety of the system. If it's not 100% safe, it doesn't open. That's a non-negotiable position as far as I'm concerned. Now, who's going to fix it? Who's going to pay for it? People can fight that stuff out, but we should never even consider even saying something that would say, well, this is close enough to being fixed that we're going to go ahead and answer. If it's not 100%, everybody's ready to go, it is safe, we don't open. And I agree with Senator Black. Concrete is not rocket science. And but you're right, you can cheat on it, and that's how you make money, and that's not acceptable.
Mr. Vargas?
So just briefly, as someone who's out in that part of the region as well, beyond just the commuters that are going to be impacted by the Silver Line and the benefits that they'll face, there's also going to be economic reverberations beyond the region, even in other parts of the Commonwealth. So I just want to thank WMATA for stepping in at this point, cooperating and making sure that we're doing it the right way. It's too important for it not to be done right, not just for commuters, but also the region and the Commonwealth's business.
Yeah, and just so we're clear, this is not a WMATA project. This is the Airport Authority project with oversight of these contractors.
Which is why it's good that we say thank you to WMATA for stepping in.
Now the general manager is engaged at this point with representatives from Loudoun, Fairfax, and the Airport Authority on these issues, but it is their project.
But I will say, much to Mr. Vargas's point, knowing the importance of it to the region, that's why WMATA is not taking the position, okay, do what you do, and then we'll come in at the end and tell you whether we like it. It's let's engage early to try and figure out how we get this right as quickly as possible.
Just very briefly, because of what Christian said, I'm revisiting in my mind what Ms. Garvey was asking for. The region really hasn't spoken on this in a uniform way. I'm understanding our WMATA folks are hearing this, but depending on what type of response we get back from the letter that Fairfax County sent in, I just want to keep the idea ripe in people's minds that we may want to do that, and we may want to do it next month, depending on what type of response we get, because I agree with everything everybody said about the importance of this. This affects every single person in this region, not just where the tracks are. Right. And so, while we sent our letter in, because we have a huge vested interest in it geographically, it's a regional issue. And at some point, we may need to weigh in as a region. So let's just keep our mind on that as we move forward.
Maybe to put a finer point on that, I'll propose, I don't know that we need a motion on it, do my head nod, that we as a commission ask the WMATA committee to formally consider that and pursuant to whatever kind of reaction you all get, bring forward a recommended letter in November with staff's assistance. Any objections to that? Thank you. Okay, well, thank you both. Were there is there other WMATA news you plan to share this evening?
Tough.
Pretty exhaustively.
Yeah.
Listen, I don't assume there's lots going on. Please, yeah, Mr.
Question
Evan.
for WMATA board members. I was wondering what the ridership has been since the yellow and blue line shut down, if we know if, where we are on that?
I think is it,
Greg,
Greg,
good.
90%?
85 to 90.
85 to
90%. Okay.
Thanks for the very good question from Alexandria, especially. Mr. Scott.
My question was asked and answered.
Great.
Another interesting tidbit, apparently during the shutdown, 60% of all rail riders were accommodated with alternatives, which is an amazing number.
Transit.
And stayed.
Yeah.
And stayed. Yeah.
You know, alternatives that were developed by WMATA and the city of Alexandria and other Fairfax and other partners. It's ridiculous.
Which is, okay.
That's really exciting.
Yeah,
For
ridiculous.
transportation.
Well, and I think our staff.
So, Mr. Snyder, did you have a question? I don't want to move on if you had your hand up, sir.
Actually, I'm sure.
No, Mr. Scott.
At last month's meeting, as I was reading through the minutes, we had a conversation about summer 2020 shutdown on the Orange Line. I think at that point, WMATA had indicated that they were working through some plans. Are those still in development, or is there any update to the station shutdowns on the Orange Line?
Yeah, they're working through the plans and, there were a lot of lessons learned in the first shutdown. Working with jurisdictional staff.
We'll
And
see.
internally. Oh, yeah.
We'll see but the specifics on the proposed dates the station's affected is
Yeah, oh, yeah.
forthcoming when. Christian
Another,
just left.
probably a month or two. That sound about right, Greg? About another month or two?
We're working through the issues on the contract.
Yeah, right, yeah.
Okay, thank you. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off if you want to follow.
That was my follow-up.
Yeah, that'll be about 7 months out, 8 months out.
Those lessons learned are gonna be
Yeah,
Thank you,
yeah.
Madam Chair, if I could,
Please.
because
It went
we actually
pretty
had,
smooth, actually.
we had the opportunity today to actually have a meeting of a lot of the jurisdictional staff, as well as VDOT and Pentagon staff, all talking about lessons learned from the summer shutdown. There's been a lot, an amazing amount of staff time from across the region put into that. And I think there's a lot of really, really good lessons, everything from the operations to communications, a lot of things that are going to be able to help inform what we're doing next year. And so if I could, I do want to do a shout out to Matt Chang on our staff, because he did a fantastic job in bringing all these folks together. And as soon as we have the final information from WMATA, we're already ready to pivot. And so it really was, I said, I had the opportunity today for about a 2.5-hour meeting, and just listening. All I was doing was listening to the various jurisdictions and WMATA staff and others talking about sort of what happened, sort of a SWOT analysis of what happened over the summer. And I think it's really a testament to how the region can come together and move people during that situation. So
Can I?
It's probably a great note to.
Can I ask Kate a question? Is it generally accepted that summertime is the best time of year for that type?
I would have to defer, I'm not a construction person. I was gonna say, how WMATA plans and schedule these things. I guess ridership is lower in the summer, but I don't know if that.
I also should take a moment, just as a matter of process, we keep recognizing and turning to, this is Greg Potts, who is from WMATA. He is not just a general attendee who happens to be very knowledgeable. We appreciate you speaking on behalf of the agency.
Just thought we were gonna pick on a different person every
Every
month.
time. Very participatory. I'm sorry, Greg, did you want to share anything with regard to the times?
Summer is the focus of the program, so it was a 3-year platform project, and so obviously we focused on the summer this year. And so I think, again, the strategy would be to focus on summer, get us to low ridership, so that is.
So it's low ridership.
Yeah, and I think while there's no good time to do it, summer seems to be the best and the
least
time
bad.
that the least impact, if you will, but
Least bad of all bad.
the least bad, the least bad.
All right, so we do quite a few other items with regard to commuter choice. Unless I'm cutting off burning questions, I'm going to go ahead and propose we move along to the commuter choice program. We have items today regarding both the 66 inside the Beltway and the 395-95 corridor, a couple of actions to consider and some program updates. I want to welcome Ben Owen, who is our commuter choice program manager, to begin with the presentation about the commuter choice program at large. Mr. Owen, thank you.
Great, thank you. Good evening. So I will be talking through the commuter choice slides that are at your seats. Attachment 5, I believe. Part of that. So as the vice chair mentioned, we have 2 actions and 2 updates on today's agenda. The first item is an action concerning the program as a whole, both the I-66 and 395-95 corridors, as action to authorize the executive director to submit the commuter choice program fiscal year 2019 annual report to the Commonwealth Transportation Board. On slide 3, you see an image of the cover of the report. I believe you also have the report, which is pretty hot off the presses. Just as a bit of background, we at NVTC are party to memorandum of agreement with the Commonwealth that govern the commuter choice program. One of the provisions for both of our corridors is that we need to report on the status of the program to the CTV each year. So the report in front of you presents information on all of the projects funded through the end of fiscal year 2019. That's through June 30th of this year. So that includes the first 3 rounds of I-66 inside the Beltway funding. Future reports will also include 395 and 95 projects. This report is due to the CTV by November 1st. And a few of the highlights in it, since the commuter choice program was launched, we've funded 36 projects worth over $40 million in the I-66 corridor. Collectively, these projects are moving an additional 8,300 people through the corridor each day, improving connections between 20 activity centers in Northern Virginia, reducing close to 1 million annual hours of delay. So I'm happy to take any questions about the annual report to start.
Excellent. Questions about this beautifully produced annual report? I see some nods of approval. All right, seeing no questions, but we can let you continue. We're moving next then to the oh, excuse me, you're right.
This does go to the
CTV. We don't just admire it. We actually need to do something with it. We need to authorize Kate as our executive director to submit it, the annual report to the Commonwealth Transportation Board. So I'll invite a motion to do that.
Resolution 2392.
Okay.
Yes. The resolution will be on the I-395, so
This is actually.
that is a
just
little
the
bit later.
average. But I do think we have a motion to the authorization effect. Is there a second for it?
Second.
Great, seconded by Mr. Meyer. Okay, any further discussion about that report? Seeing none, all in favor, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Great, thank you for the work. So transitioning then to the I-95, 395, we do have an action item here to consider forwarding our program of projects to the CTV, as well as executing or authorizing Kate to execute the standard project agreements. We have Mr. Owen to continue, and then I just want to tee up that we are very glad to have Jeff McKay here to talk about this. As some of you may remember, this project is a little bit different than 66 commuter choice in that it is a partnership of PRTC and NVTC. And I really want to begin by thanking Mr. McKay for his leadership of this first ever effort. So we'll have some comments and remarks from him as well as Mr. Owen. But Mr. Owen, I think we're going to start with you, right?
Okay, great. Yeah, so since this is a joint program, also this is our first program of projects. PRTC is actually receiving a very similar briefing this evening, and their commission will be taking action on a comparable resolution tonight as well. So moving on to slide number 5 in your presentation, just a quick recap of I-95 commuter choice. This program is investing a portion of toll revenues from the soon-to-be 395 express lanes into multimodal improvements in the I-95 and 395 corridor from Spotsylvania County up to the DC line. NVTC and PRTC jurisdictions are eligible to apply for the program as our public transit providers serving those areas. We at NVTC are handling the day-to-day administration of the program on behalf of both commissions because PRTC is an eligible applicant for their OmniRide bus system. Anything we fund under the program must benefit toll payers in the 395-95 corridor. Projects must also maximize person throughput in the corridor and foster multimodal improvements to improve mobility, travel choices, and safety and reliability. So we have an annual payment schedule for this program from the Express Lanes concessionaire. The first payment of $15 million is due on or about toll day 1 this fall. Our inaugural program is covering 20 months. That's a little bit unconventional, but that's to align the program schedule with our fiscal year calendar. So this inaugural program is going through the end of fiscal year 2021. The $22 million, that's the maximum amount we have available, reflects all of the first year's payment and about half of the second year's payment. Slide 6 gives a very high-level review of where we are with the inaugural program. It's been a rapid process since our goal is to have projects underway when toll day 1 occurs this fall. So our call for projects was opened this spring. We received 17 applications with a total funding request of a bit over $30 million. During the summer, we reviewed these for eligibility and scored them. Our Commonwealth partners at the Department of Rail and Public Transportation provided an additional level of review of the applications. We had a 1-month public comment period from early August to early September. Your attachments include a summary of the comments we received. Overall, there were 71 unique comments. Almost all received via online survey form, and they were overwhelmingly supportive of specific projects and or the program as a whole. Most recently, the Joint Commission Working Group met on September 12th to identify the program of projects that we'll be talking about in just a moment. And tonight, the action is to, we're seeking the Commission's concurrence on the proposed program and to refer that to the Commonwealth Transportation Board, which has the final approval authority. They're scheduled to take it up on October 17th. Thereafter, we can begin to execute project agreements in anticipation of Tollway 1 late this year. So slide number 7 shows a lot. This is shows all 17 applications we received to the program, along with the ones that we are recommending for funding under the inaugural program. And it's endorsed by the Joint Commission Working Group at that meeting last month. There's also a clean version of this program on the next slide. So some highlights of the proposed inaugural program: it's 10 projects, a total award of $19 million. We feel pretty confident that these projects demonstrate robust benefits to toll payers, and they also scored well in our evaluation process. Overall, there are 3 new bus services, 5 enhanced bus services, and 2 transportation demand management efforts that would move over 700 more people through the corridor in the morning inbound peak, save approximately 89,000 hours of annual delay for their users, and improve connections between 12 activity centers in the region. And notably, all but one of these will be underway by Tollway 1. As I mentioned, we reviewed these applications closely with our Commonwealth partners. There were 3 proposals that were referred by their applicants in light of concerns about the benefits to toll payers. As I mentioned, up to $22 million is available. We're proposing a $19 million award that would leave a $3 million available balance for our next call for projects. So I'll ask Commissioner McKay for his remarks on the Joint Commission Working Group meeting.
Thank you, Ben, and I think you've covered it quite well. I just want to commend our staff, NVTC staff, because we're administering this program. Also want to draw everyone's attention to the chart because, as you can see, it's a very well-balanced chart between NVTC and PRTC. And I can't remember a time where we've done something like this with PRTC. And so this was an evolution, but a very positive one. And our meetings have been very productive. And I want to thank as well the folks from this commission who participated, Ms. Garvey, Ms. Bennett Parker, who participated in the program as well. And so we didn't just approve this, this was unanimously approved by the task force of joint PRTC and NVTC, which is pretty remarkable. I didn't think that's where we would end up when we began this process, and we've had several meetings to get to that point. And so with that, I'm happy to move resolution 2392.
Second. Excellent. Any further discussion or questions of this suite of projects? Or the resolution at hand? All right, you all must have done a very thorough job of preempting any questions. In that case, all those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed? All right, that carries unanimously. I believe that our final item with regard to commuter choice is an information item. If it sounded like an awful lot of work to pull off both 395, 95, and 66 in 1 year, it is. And so staff, I know, has been working on thinking about the best way to administer this program going forward. And Mr. Owen has some thoughts for us.
Yeah, so I will talk through some proposed changes for the upcoming I-66 commuter choice round 4 call for projects. So just to be clear tonight, this is just a briefing on a couple of proposed changes to the program structure. We'll be coming back for action next month when we seek your approval to open that call for projects. So a bit of background. Over the spring and summer, staff met with the Program Advisory Committee to discuss potential changes to the scoring of commuter choice projects. We took that feedback. We've developed an updated scoring approach, which was presented to and endorsed by PAC. We've also developed a plan to transition to a 2-year call for project cycle. So those are the changes that I'll be talking through this evening. If those are approved next month, they would take effect for that call for projects for I-66, round 4, covering fiscal years 21. So slide 11 has a very quick refresher on I-66 commuter choice. Very similar concept to 395-95. This is our more established program. Here we're investing a portion of I-66 inside the Beltway toll revenues into multimodal improvements. Jurisdictions and public transit providers in funding District 8 shown in the map are eligible to apply. Tier 2 projects must benefit toll payers and they must meet one of the 5 improvement goals shown here. We don't have a set payout schedule for this corridor as we receive funds that remain after VDOT pays its tolling expenses. So to give a rough idea, the last 2 funding rounds, one was $12 million, one was $20 million. We're awaiting estimates for the next year to find out what we might have available for this upcoming call for projects. Slide 12, I'll talk first through the proposed evaluation process changes. And this slide just shows what the current scoring approach is that we've used in our calls for projects for both corridors. So the majority of points, 55 out of 100, go into technical merit, which consists of factors reflecting the improvement goals for both corridors. We then have had a priorities criterion for the last I-66 round. These were qualitative priorities defined by jurisdictional staff. For the first round of 395 and 95, we looked at how quickly proposed projects could be implemented relative to Tollway 1. We then had a cost effectiveness measure looking at comparing the total technical merit score to the commuter choice funding request, and finally an applicant preference criterion allowing each applicant to identify their top priority proposal and receive 10 points for that. Slide 13 shows our proposed changes to the approach, and the main motivation for these changes was direction we received from the Program Advisory Committee earlier this year to account for the long-term benefits of capital projects with long-lived assets. So our proposed approach to doing that is to annualize the cost effectiveness measure. That is, we'd be taking into account the useful life of capital components that we're funding in that computation. So instead of comparing the total technical merit score to the total commuter choice funding request, we'd be comparing the score to how much of that funding request occurs in any given year, considering the lifespan of the project elements. Long story short, it should allow capital-intensive projects to compete better under that criteria. We're proposing a couple of further improvements to the process that we as staff identified. One of these is to separate technical evaluation more clearly from project prioritization that falls under the Commission's purview. So we found with regional priorities under the last I-66 call for projects that many of these duplicated other criteria, and it's also kind of challenging with a diverse set of jurisdictions to identify one clear set of priorities. So our proposal is to put 15 of the 20 priorities points into technical merit. This would also create more consistency for applicants. The other change we're proposing is creation of interagency collaboration criterion, basically to encourage eligible applicants to work together on projects, at a minimum demonstrating support from other jurisdictions that would be affected by the project, but this could go as far as jointly developing projects. And this criterion also allows for effectively sort of a sub-regional prioritization. And that if your neighbors are supportive of it, you can earn the points for that, if you can demonstrate that. So should the commission approve these changes next month, our hope is to keep them in place for at least 5 years without further substantive changes. Again, for predictability's sake, we reviewed these with jurisdictional staff in July, presented them to PAC members in August. Generally, there was good support for the changes and agreement that they would create more predictability for applicants. So slide 14 just shows a clean version of the proposed technical evaluation approach. On slide 15, this kind of highlights the other substantial change we're proposing for the upcoming call for projects, which is basically going forward, each call for projects we're anticipating will cover 2 years of funding. So this will allow us to do calls in alternating years for 66 and 395, 95. Basically, that will allow applicants and us to focus limited resources on one corridor at a time. So the way it would work is we would solicit proposals for projects beginning anytime in fiscal year 21 or 22, scoring these projects as a single set, presenting them to the commission as such for consideration. Staff would recommend projects for each fiscal year of funding based on such factors as the proposed timelines for implementation of the projects. So we also reviewed this concept with jurisdictional staff and the PAC over the summer, and there was good support for this as well. We will be having a work session later this month to go over in more detail with applicants just how this would work and how it would affect our ongoing administration of the program. The very last and final item on slide 16 is the proposed schedule for I-66 Round 4. This is a similar schedule to what we anticipate for other calls for projects going forward as well, based around the CTB's timeframe for adopting their 6-year improvement program each June. So the plan for I-66 Round 4 is to open the call for projects on or about November 15th, right after the next commission meeting, have it open through January. We will also be beginning briefings with applicants next week to outline the planned structure of this call for projects and learn about some of the proposals they have in mind. So I'm happy to take any questions on those proposed changes.
Mr. Owen, if I can take acting chair's prerogative and just ask a question. You mentioned a work session with applicants on the way the changes play out. This is, I imagine, has already been briefed with our program advisory committee, but will there be further engagement through that subcommittee of this body on the impacts of the changes?
Yeah.
Right, so the goal of the work session is actually, since we did get pretty strong endorsement from our program advisory committee about these process changes, the goal of the work session is really to dive into the day-to-day administration. It comes into changes to the application, what the actual physical application is going to look like online. Process changes a little bit because we're doing 2 years worth of funding. It looks a little bit different. There's one of the discussions is, are you applying for 21 money, 22 money? How does that work into a program? How do you apply? And some of the more day-to-day down to weeds stuff. But I think conceptually we have endorsement from our program advisory committee. This is getting really, really far down into the weeds of how we all will do it on a day-to-day basis to make sure we have a good program for you all to consider later on down. And there's been a continuous staff engagement that, and we've identified a couple other opportunities to engage with staff over this next cycle as we continue. Programs evolve, moving to a 2-year. These are big changes, and we're gradually implementing them and working very closely with staff to make sure they really understand what the implications are. And hearing back from them is like, what does that mean for them, and how can we continue to improve the program?
That was helpful. Thank you. And Ms. Lemunya, do you need to interrupt your opportunity for a question there?
Not at all. I have a couple of questions on the 2-year cycle. Is that coordinated with NVTA in any way? Does it need to be? I'm just thinking of public input. Public sort of sees this all as one transportation problem in Northern Virginia, not divided up by little commissions. And just staff time and working on these things too. So is there any coordination or any thought given to that yet?
So that's a good question. We do work very closely with all of our regional agencies. We're on a little bit of a different cycle than NVTC is at the moment. I think 27th is when they closed their last cycle, which was a week or so ago. They closed out their cycle. Theirs is slightly different. Ours is synced up with the state's fiscal year, so we can make sure each time we have a program of projects, it syncs up to get into their 6-year plan. So our schedule is pretty much dictated by what the state schedule is, because each year when these programs, like the one that just went for 395, goes to the CTB, it gets looped into their 6-year cycle. At the same time, I think it's important to point out one of the differences of the program. This is one of the rare opportunities you have out there to competitively look for operating funding. That's one of the things that the authority primary focus on capital. We have a really big opportunity here to help our jurisdictions bring good eligible projects in to help them operate them. And so I think one of the unique ways we fit into that overall regional approach of trying to address some of the problems we have.
Follow-up question? Yeah. Okay. I'm looking at this new box, interagency collaboration, and I noticed in the notes for the meeting, there was a sentence or two about that. I'm going to read it here. It says this is a 5-point criterion that would provide scoring incentive for eligible applicants to coordinate or partner on project proposals and thereby allow for a measure of sub-regional project prioritization. I don't know what sub-region project prioritization means, so I'd be interested in learning about that. And the concern I have, maybe you could address, is I wouldn't want that scoring criteria, even though it's only 5 points, to encourage parochialism. So Fairfax comes with only Fairfax projects, or Alexandria with only Alexandria, or are intended that way, that they're cooperating and collaborating on projects that benefit the region, not just one locality.
I think your comment, right there actually gets at what the crux of it is. The idea is that we want people working together. We started to see a couple examples so far, getting people to talk. And that's kind of what we're doing as this regional entity here, is by doing that, you can help your project by saying exactly what you're talking about. Let's say if Alexandria and Arlington want to really work closely together, they can have those 5 discretionary points because they went out of their way to make sure that they talk to each other, they're endorsing each other's projects. It is a collaborative effort to think just beyond the parochial approach. I think that's what we're trying to get at with that criteria.
At a minimum, have applicants talk to their neighbors, and that's kind of what we meant in terms of some sort of sub-regional prioritization, like not just one jurisdiction's proposal, but ideally something that's at least supported by other neighboring jurisdictions as well.
All right, thank you.
Thank you. Other questions?
I had one quick question unrelated to the specific criteria. On diversion to neighborhood streets, I'm wondering if we could ask Nick Donahue to determine how are they monitoring that and what are the results. We're seeing a significant increase in cut-through traffic. Our chief of police thinks that it's partly the I-66.
That is an excellent question. And I recall actually, we got those stats in the 6 months after the tolling had been implemented. And I was surprised actually to see that it wasn't higher. I think actually they'd seen basically no change. I'd be also very interested 1 year on, 18 months on. So I'd really echo that interest. I think we may be seeing Deputy Secretary Donahue in the next couple of months of commission meetings anyway, so we can add that.
And VDOT does report, so if there's something that's within the last month or so, I will be sure to forward it. I'll just have to
that's
see. They
great.
do regular reports. I just don't know when the last one was completed.
Okay, so that's great. So maybe the right next step there is to, if there is something you can share with Mr. Snyder in the immediate, and then we could talk about broader trends when we're next with a representative of the secretary. Okay. Seeing no further questions, I don't believe we have any more action items there. That was helpful information. Thank you for presenting it. We're going to move next to Virginia Railway Express and invite Mr. Allen to give a report.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Average daily ridership for September was 19,000, which is slightly higher than it was a year ago. On-time performance on the Manassas line was 77% and Fredericksburg line was 81%. We've been having some challenges with on-time performance, largely because of heat. The heat didn't bother us as much, but we did have heat-related delays in September. What we did have also were a bridge strike where a RV ran into one of the railroad bridges and had to have the inspector come out and make sure it's safe to cross, brush fire. And then there was a major breakdown of a railroad, of a train, an Amtrak train north of Union Station that really followed a lot of tracks and really restricted our movement and caused a lot of delays. Positive Train Control is a safety system that we put in this spring. Except for a few planned outages that we had for maintenance and some minor upgrades, we are not seeing any material issues with PTCs working like it's designed. We are still analyzing and providing recommendations to our host railroads for other reliability and performance-related enhancements. On Wednesday, VRE, NVTC, and PRTC staff were all aboard. We're aboard all 16 VRE northbound trains, as well as 4 Amtrak trains, as we undertook the annual master agreement survey that identifies where our riders are coming from, which is used to allocate the subsidy payment. Results will be available in December. And just to again highlight that NVTC staff and PRTC staff are very helpful in facilitating that survey. Last Saturday, VRE partnered with the city of Manassas, their fire and rescue teams, to host a full-scale emergency drill out at our Broad Run station. Emergency personnel in these drills are allowed to have hands-on experience while they're simulating a real train emergency. Crews practice fire suppression techniques, patient and search and extraction, how to take the windows out, how to extract a passenger if there's no other way of getting them out. So it's really valuable for them to have hands-on training with the equipment. We also have hosted a tour. We had a group from India and Bangladesh here on Tuesday. We showed them, gave them a good tour of VRE. And tomorrow we will be hosting representatives from North Carolina. North Carolina Railroad Company is interested in pursuing commuter rail, and they want to come out and see our operation. This last, in late July and early August, track work was completed at the Slater's Lane crossing in the Alexandria-Arlington area. Crossing modifications will allow trains to go from track 2 to track 1. That opens up a lot of flexibility, which results in more capacity and allows us to move more trains through that very congested area. Interestingly, that improvement was one of the commitments that we had to make to allow that CSX needed to have us commit so that we could add the Potomac Shores Station in Prince William County to that line. I wanted to acknowledge Metro for working with us on an issue at the Franconia Springfield parking garage. Previously, VRE riders would have had to spend $8.95 to park there. Mark Schofield, my chief financial officer, worked with WMATA, and we were able to reduce that down to the $4.95 that regular WMATA riders used to park at that location. So that's a very collaborative effort so that we are getting more riders taking advantage of VRE. You were talking earlier about the summer shutdown. We were able to attract some of those riders from Metro onto VRE. It looks like some of them stayed. Just turned out to be a little bit better ride for their particular trip. So we have been able to facilitate that. We also have begun upgrading our ticket vending machines. We are using the same stainless steel cabinets, but everything in the cabinet, all the major components have been replaced. So we will be having a new state-of-the-art touch screens, pin pads, credit card readers, contactless payment pad so riders will be able to use their cell phone to pay. So it's really a great upgrade for our ticket vending machines, make it a lot easier for our riders to use it, very intuitive. And with that concludes my report. I'd be glad to take any questions, Madam Chair.
Thank you very much. Mr. Allen, questions for the VRE CEO? Okay, seeing none, we're going to move into our action items with regard to the VRE, and I'll ask Ms. Bullivan to present them.
And Madam Chairman, we have 2 action items. The first would authorize the referral of the preliminary fiscal year 2021 VRE operating and capital budget to the jurisdictions. And the VRE Operations Board recommends action to refer the preliminary fiscal year budget to the jurisdictions. VRE staff will review the budget with our jurisdictional staffs and then ultimately provide a balanced budget to the Operations Board in December for consideration and referral to NVTC and TRTC. And that will be for final approval at our January 2020 meetings. The VRE preliminary fiscal year 2021 operating budget totals $93 million, which includes operations, maintenance, and existing debt service. This is an increase of $3.7 million or 4.1% over the approved fiscal year 2020 operating budget. The capital budget includes commitments of $69 million or $69.2 million from federal, state, regional, and local funding sources towards the capital improvement program. At this point, there is a $2.1 million shortfall in there being a balanced budget, but VRE staff in coordination with our CAO task force will work together to eliminate that gap over the course of the next week. weeks. And with that, just with that, I'm happy to move approval of resolution 2394, which would authorize the submission of the, or let's see, am I moving the right one? I'm not. Resolution 2393, which is referring the preliminary budget to our jurisdictional staffs.
Second.
Thank you. Any discussion on that motion with regard to the preliminary budget? Seeing none, all those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Okay, that carries unanimously.
And our next action item would approve resolution 2394, which would be the submission of, or authorize the submission of 2 VRE projects to NVTA for the fiscal year 2024 to fiscal year 2025, 6-year program update funding consideration. And let's see, we have several projects that are listed that we're requesting approval for. I'm trying to find what they are. And the projects are the Crystal City Station improvements and the Woodbridge Station and track improvements for the final design. And so I'm happy to move approval of action item or the resolution 2393.
Still second. Okay, excellent. Any questions about those 2 projects for MBTA funding? Okay, with no questions, all those in favor of the motion, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed?
And the rest of the VRE items are information items.
Thank you very much, and they are available in the written report. Thank you, and thank you to Mr. Allen. Okay, we'll move on to our penultimate item, which is the NVTC Transit Resource Center. So let me turn it to Ms. Matei for an introduction.
Absolutely. So one of the things that NVTC does and has done for a long time is collecting data and reporting on transit trends for all of the systems that are serving Northern Virginia. And we regularly report on multiple types of data, such as ridership and parking utilization in the WMATA sections. And then we also do quarterly ridership reports on all of our transit systems. And so one of the things that we've done as staff is kind of done a deep dive. We have a lot of data. And so we're thinking about ways to improve in the way we present it to you. So one of the things that we've got for you this month is some of the new data. And I want to say that Dan Goldfarb and a number of folks on our staff have been really diving in to get better methodology on how we collect and present data, making sure it's more timely and more relevant. At the same time, of course, not losing track of all the voluminous amount of data that we get through the National Transit Database. So the report that you have tonight, and it was provided with you in your materials, and I'm not going to go through every slide because I'm always respectful of folks' times, but it really is a first step in the process. It's showing high-level trends regarding ridership of all of our transit agencies. And then over the next year, we're going to be working towards visualizing data in different ways and presenting it to you at routine times throughout the course of the year. So, because we are obviously really important in being able to tell the story about how transit serves Northern Virginia. So a couple of the key findings I wanted to highlight from our annual report, and as I said, for those who want to follow along, we do have it in your materials, but just some highlights is that almost half of the unlinked transit trips in Northern Virginia involve bus. VRE with the lowest service level still carries about 7% of these unlinked transit trips. So we do have a good diversification of how we move people. And although transit ridership has been declining from an all-time high in around 2008, it does appear to be stabilizing. I know we talked a little bit about that before. But here in Northern Virginia, transit moves about 250,000 people on an average day. And though in recent years, ridership's been declining, as I said, it's starting to stabilize, and we're actually seeing some individual systems seeing small gains in ridership. Weekday ridership, of course, is greatly influenced by commuter travel. The weekday average ridership is greater than twice on Saturday and Sunday, although as ridership's been declining on weekdays and weekends, the weekday ridership, sort of the ratio of weekday to weekend ridership has actually been increasing, and it's basically reflecting reliability on the weekday service. VRE continues to experience strong ridership, as Doug was just talking about, and train utilization. That's how many people are in each of those trains as they're going through. The service, of course, which operates on weekdays, primarily in the morning and evening, carries close to 10% of the transit riders in Northern Virginia. Metro Bus carries the majority of bus riders in Northern Virginia, but Fairfax Connector carries approximately half as many riders, and then Dash then a quarter of the Metro Bus riders. And overall bus in Northern Virginia has shown a decline from a high actually in 2015. But again, I've talked about the stabilization and the limited growth. And where we're seeing that growth is actually in a number of the commuter routes. We're going to come back in a couple months talking about the trends on I-66, but we are seeing a lot of growth in some of the projects that we've funded in I-66 corridor in terms of moving more people through on those commuter routes through Loudoun County and OmniRide. So as I mentioned, the attached report includes the trends for specific transit providers. It also has a little bit of overview of TPB's State of the Commute survey that was released last month. We're going to see if we can carve out some time at one of our upcoming meetings to dive into that a little bit more. And that is what I have, and Dan is available, and Dina are available to answer any questions.
All right. Well, thank you for sharing that. And I think it was encouraging to see that perhaps we are stabilizing the ridership, and let's go from here. Okay, without any questions on that matter, I will once again turn things to Kate for her ED report.
All right. My notes are a little organized here. And so again, I do have included in your materials my newsletter, which has a lot of great photos of the improvements at the platforms along the yellow and blue line. And obviously, there's a ton of activity that was going on there, so we have a wonderful little collage. But I do want to draw your attention to a couple of upcoming events, both of which are actually, we've got them highlighted on a flyer here, and I'm really happy to say that next Tuesday, and we actually have Mr. Dorsey's involved in this and helping us out as well, is that we are actually hosting here in this facility right here a panel for the Conference of Minority Transportation Officials, COMTO, the DC chapter, which is pretty much a highlighting how Northern Virginia is preparing for Amazon HQ2 through transportation improvements. We have Jennifer Mitchell, we have Mr. Dorsey, and we have Mr. Leach from Arlington County coming to speak to that group. So we're excited to have them here. And also then, of course, later in December, we have our annual joint NVTC and PRTC legislative briefing on December 9th at the Embassy Suites in Springfield. We have invited Secretary Valentine, as well as Paul Wiedefeld, Doug Allen, and then Bob Schneider and I will all be talking about the policy issues, the things that are going on. Historically, we've had over 100 people attending. We love to see commissioners there. We can even make you part of the program. Just let me know. But we're looking forward to that. Some schedule changes. I did want to make a note. Next month, our commission meeting will be a week later than it typically would due to some conflicts. So that is going to be on November 14th. Thank you. And so we'll be diving into our legislative agenda at that meeting, as well as we talked about earlier, talking about our next call for projects for I-66, perhaps among other things. Our December meeting will be scheduled as normal on Thursday, December 5th, and that will be an opportunity for us to recognize many of our members that we may not be seeing next year. So I wanted to put that out there. And also for those who are looking to we're not going to make you come into summer.
Those of us that didn't meeting, John.
For those of you who are looking to the new year, normally our meeting would be held on January 2nd. That's a little difficult timing, given a lot of appointments and other things that seem to happen. And so you should have been already notified. We plan on having our meeting on January 16th. So that'll be 2 weeks later, again, within this facility. So stay tuned for more information on that. I think I may just end here because I know folks are anxious to get out. But obviously, we do have our financial items that are included in the kit as usual. Thank you.
Ms. Lawrence, do you have a question?
Not on that topic, but on another one at the appropriate time.
You know, I don't know that we have official member time in the agenda, so I think this is as good as any.
I was going to mention something during the WMATA section, and I apologize for not doing it. I'll just be really brief. In the form of a short story, I had a 3-day meeting in Baltimore this week. So I had a really great idea on Sunday that I was going to park at the Reston multi-day parking spot, take the Metro to Union Station and Amtrak to Baltimore. And I got to Reston and I went down all 4 levels to the very bottom where those 10 spots are, and they were all full, even though the rest of the garage was completely empty. In fact, there were 15 other cars parked around those 10, I guess, hoping that whoever might tow them would grant them mercy instead. And so I did not attempt to park there. I just drove out and drove to Baltimore in my car. But it occurred to me on the way that with the airport line opening, hopefully next year, more people may want to park and take the train to the airport. And there are very few garages that allow multi-day parking at all. Reston's one, and I'll just say 10's not enough.
Right.
So I would just, whoever thinks about those things, that's maybe something to consider in the context of opening the line to the airport.
I know our county's talked about it in our contracts with WMATA about the parking garages. It's been brought up by now. I don't know what the result's been. It's a good question.
It's cheaper to park.
No, it's
in
definitely a good
Reston than it
question.
is at the airport. I figured that out.
Yeah, Jim, I know there have been discussions. I don't know where they are. Yeah, in Fairfax. too,
Fairfax
is,
supervisors
yeah.
may have something to say about that
Yeah.
one, right?
So what do we do to move that along?
Would you like to say something? I know the parking at garages is.
No, I'm okay.
You bite your tongue.
I've heard.
You bite your tongue any harder, Jeff. It's-
I
it's
know,
not
I'm
on.
dying to know.
We've heard
Well-
the concern.
Well, perhaps for further discussion. Thank you for bringing up and for attempting to use transit to get to the airport.
I know,
Okay.
I'm
Is there
really
any-
brokenhearted that you ended up having to drive.
I know.
mean,
You should,
that
yeah,
would've
this is
been-
terrible.
Hey, Sunday I was all for like reducing my carbon footprint.
You're gonna have so much connectivity, all the work you could have done.
And this is on tape, Jim.
And there was no bike
Although
lane in the
I am
airport.
disappointed to conclude on such a depressing note. Any final remarks, Mr. Vargas?
Just really quickly, just for Kate, the email follow-ups on some of the questions that came up last meeting, I thought were great. So sometimes it's great to just follow up via email as opposed to taking up time in the meeting. I did have two quick things that I would like to see if we could follow up via email. Number one, for Mr. Allen, via email, just a brief comment when you have a chance. The customer survey, some of the numbers were pretty surprising.
Yes.
So if there could be just a couple sentence description as to what that is, it could be via email, not now. And then secondly, if we can get an update on where we are in terms of 66 expansion inside the Beltway via email.
Yes.
Thank you.
Also, Madam Chair, let me in on two positive Metro notes. First of all, Metro was great on Tuesday night after the sporting events. And secondly, I love their ads about more Metro, less CO2.
There we go.
All right, with no further business to come before the commission, I move that we adjourn. Is there a second?
Second.
All those in favor? Aye. We are adjourned.
Do CO2.
Our marketing campaign is like live and going nuts. And I totally just,
Obviously.
anyway.